Hi guys, thanks so much for joining me for this video. So right now I'm going to talk about your writing assignment in more detail. So this is going to piggyback directly from your topic and 5 sources assignment. So the next thing you're going to work on after you turn that in is your annotated bibliography, right? So in this video, I'm going to talk about how to properly write an annotated bibliography, particularly one in which your subject matter is psychological science. Okay, so what are your next steps? Okay, so now that you have come up with a research question and created a thesis statement and found at least 5 journal articles in support of your thesis statement, now it is time to prepare to write an annotated bibliography. Okay, so the purpose of an annotated bibliography is to give you the chance to prepare a scholarly summary of all of these sources that you found, right? So remember, you came up with a research question and you attempted to address it in your thesis statement based on the information you acquired from those research articles, okay? So the annotated bibliography is a more detailed summary and explanation of what you discovered when you did that literature search. All right, so now I'm going to start going through each of the components of an annotated bibliography. So the first component of an annotated bibliography is going to be your APA style reference. So just to recap from my previous video, I'm going to go through each component of an APA style reference for you as well. So this is a slightly different diagram than the one I showed you before. Just for variety purposes, you know, the information is the same. And this diagram is nice because it uses highlighting to denote different kinds of information. So for example, purple represents author-related information. So the first thing you're going to do when you go to start your reference is you're going to start with the author's last name followed by a comma and the author's first initial. Now, if the author has also included their middle initial, you can include that as well. So for example, my name is Dorothy Rose Buckley, and when people cite my research articles, the way they would cite it is Buckley, followed by a comma, and then DR, right? So my first initial D for Dorothy, and my middle initial is going to be R for Rose. Okay, next in blue, we have the date, right? So remember, we always want to include the year of publication, which in this case was 2018. So we're going to go ahead and put that in parentheses followed by a period. Okay. Next in yellow is we have the title. And remember, this isn't MLA, so we're not going to use title case. We're going to capitalize the first letter, okay? And then we're going to make use of a colon in the title. So we're going to capitalize the first word after the colon, right? So we capitalize past, we capitalize educational, and everything else is lowercase, okay? And the title is always followed by a period. And then in green, we have journal related information or source related information. Okay, so this particular article was published in the Journal of Educational Psychology. So we're going to have that italicized, and then we're going to include a comma, and we're going to follow that comma by the volume number, which is always italicized. And then immediately after the volume number, which is 110 there, we're going to include the item number, or the issue number, excuse me, and the issue number is in parentheses and it is not capitalized. Okay, so we're going to separate the journal name, Journal of Educational Psychology, with a comma, and we're also going to include a comma after the italicized volume number next to the issue number, right? So after the volume number and issue number, we're going to include a comma. And then lastly, the easiest part is we're just going to include the pages, right? So the article starts on page 147 and ends on page 162, okay? And then we have the DOI number that we can just pop into our web browser if we want to locate the article, okay? One other thing to note, and this is again a recall from your APA tutorial that you completed for lab, is that in your summary, which we're going to talk about next, when you refer to a particular article in the text of your paper, okay, you're going to want to include parenthetical citations, right? So parenthetical citations are always the author or authors' last names separated by a comma and then the year of publication, right? Notice another difference with MLA here. Typically with MLA, you would have the author's first and middle initials, and then the last name, right? Not the case with APA. With APA, we simply have the author's last names separated by a comma and an ampersand sign. So if this was Alexander, and that there was, if the first author was Alexander and the second author was Smith, we would have Alexander ampersand sign Smith, comma 2018. Okay. If there were three authors, so we had Alexander, Smith, and Jones, we would say Alexander, comma, Smith, comma, ampersand sign, Jones, separated by another comma and the year of publication. Okay. So our next component of the annotated bibliography is going to be our summary. Okay. And whenever you write your summary, okay, you're basically going to include all of the main components of a published research article. Okay. So you're going to tell me what is the objective of the article, or another way to think about that is what research question is the article addressing, or what is the purpose of the study or studies being conducted. Okay. Next, you're going to want to talk about the author's hypotheses. Okay. So what is their pardon me, sorry. What is their theory and what predictions are they making, right? So remember back in Module 2, I told you guys about the Simon-Weiss study, right? So Simon-Weiss was the physician and scientist who discovered childbed fever, right? And so his theory, when he discovered that more women were dying of childbed fever in wards attended by physicians than in wards attended by midwives, his theory was that the doctors were carrying some kind of... Sorry, my phone is talking to me. Siri is talking to me. The particular theory that Simon-Weiss had with respect to childbed fever was that physicians often came to the maternity wards after conducting autopsies. Okay, so he theorized that they were taking some kind of substance with them from the cadaver and basically infecting women with that cadaveric matter, he called it. So that was his theory, is that they were dying because of this cadaveric matter that was transferred from the physicians. His prediction, okay, was that if the physicians were to wash their hands with chlorine, okay, that would destroy the stuff from the cadavers, and so therefore less women would die of childbed fever, and that's what he found. Okay, so all research articles that you read should start off with a particular theory and a hypothesis with respect to what they think will happen in their study, or what results they think they will find in their study. Now, in some cases, you might have a literature review where they're just summarizing a bunch of different theories or results. Okay? And in that case, you can skip this question, or you can choose the most relevant hypothesis to your thesis to talk about. So the next component is you're going to want to tell me the independent variable, the dependent variable, if you're talking about an experiment, a paper that conducted, where the authors conducted an experiment, or you're going to want to give me the predictor variable and the criterion variable if you are talking about a study that includes correlational research. Okay, and just like you did with your Lab 1 assignment, I would like you to include both conceptual and operational definitions. Okay, so again, an exception to this might be a literature review where they're talking about multiple studies, but oftentimes, even when they're talking about multiple studies, they still operationalize the variables for you. Okay, so if you can, please include these components. Okay, and then you're going to give me the method and procedure. Okay, and really you can do this with either an experiment or a correlational study, right? So for example, if it's an experiment, I want you to tell me kind of the step-by-step process from the participant's perspective, right? So if it was a study looking at caffeine and memory, you might start out with the researchers randomly assigned participants to either a no caffeine condition, a low caffeine condition, or a high caffeine condition. Participants in the no caffeine condition consumed 8 ounces of Sprite cola or 8 ounces of water, whereas participants in the low caffeine condition consumed 4 ounces of Jolt Cola, and participants in the high caffeine condition consumed 32 ounces of Jolt Cola, or whatever, right? And then after drinking the beverage, they were presented with 30 vocabulary words on a computer screen, and then they were given a blank sheet of paper and asked to recall all of the words that they remember. Once they had recalled all of the words, they were dismissed, right? So that's an explanation of the method or procedure for an experiment. Let's suppose that you were interested in a correlation, right? So you were looking at the potential relationship between extroversion and social media use on a college campus, right? So a description of a procedure there might be participants were selected at random using a computer randomization process to participate in this experiment. So all participants were mailed an envelope with 2 questionnaires on it. One questionnaire asked them about their social media use. For example, a question might be, how many hours do you spend a day on Facebook? Another question might be, how many friends or how many people in your social network utilize social media? Okay, so that gives me an example of the kind of questionnaires they're given. And then you might say, you might describe the extroversion questionnaire. Okay, we used the extroversion questionnaire. An example might be, I enjoy socializing with other people, right? So again, you're giving me as the reader, somebody who has never read this research article, an example of what those questionnaires might look like, okay? So that's the method and procedure for either an experimental or a correlational study. Lastly, you're going to tell me the results, right? But specifically, that your results should include no statistics or numbers of any kind, okay? All you're going to tell me are the results of the study in words, okay? And you're going to relate it back to the research question, okay? So for the experiment example I just gave, the effect of caffeine on memory example, an explanation of the results might be that people in the high caffeine condition remembered more words than people in the low caffeine condition, and people in the low caffeine condition recalled more information than people in the no caffeine condition. Thus, the authors provide convincing evidence that caffeine increases or improves memory. An explanation of the correlational study looking at the relationship between extroversion and social media might be, there was a significant positive correlation such that the higher a participant's extroversion score, the more time they spent on social media, right? So at no point am I referring to any actual figures or statistical results. I'm just describing in actually just a few sentences what the results of the study are. So really, you should be spending a lot more time talking about the study objective, the hypothesis, the variables, and the method than the results. Ideally, the results part should only be a couple of sentences. Okay, so then you have implications. What are implications? Implications are basically an explanation of why these results are important, right? So for the caffeine study, right, the implication might be that moderate levels of caffeine for children in classrooms or college students or really anyone actually have are significantly beneficial for the memory system, and therefore, despite the fact that caffeine isn't necessarily good in terms of, I don't know, digestion or other processes, it does actually appear to be kind of an accelerant for learning. Okay, so that's why it matters, because it's applicable to all of those different contexts. For the correlational study looking at extroversion and social media, you would say these results are important, or the implications of the study are that there are certain personality variables that relate directly to social media use. So companies like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram would be well served if they were to target their advertising to people who are extroverted rather than introverted. Okay, so the final component is going to be your evaluation of the study. So you're going to tell me the strengths and weaknesses with respect to the study's methodology. Okay, and a lot of times this is included in the paper as well, particularly in the discussion section. Okay, so for example, you could talk about internal or external validity. Okay, so is it a well-designed laboratory experiment or that is going to offer a lot of internal validity, or is it a more naturalistic study that's going to potentially have a lot of extraneous or confounding variables? Okay, so you could talk about, like I said, if it's an experiment, you could talk about confounding and extraneous variables. If it's a study that looks at a correlation, you could talk about potential third variables. You could talk about the sampling method if they failed to utilize random assignment, and also where their participants came from, okay, which is something that you're also going to learn about this module. Okay, and again, you're going to want to look in the article's discussion for examples of limitations. Okay, and finally, you're going to give me a description of use. So that's simply, how does this article support your thesis? Okay, so for example, if your research question is, how has the coronavirus pandemic impacted the mental health of college students? Right? If you have an article that shows that, you know, students in the fall of 2020 reported significantly more instances of going to the seeking out counseling than they had in the fall of 2019. Okay, that would be an example of increased anxiety as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, or worsening mental health as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Okay, so a couple of other helpful hints I wanted to include. Okay. So for example, if your research question, if for your research question you are interested in the relationship between depression and social media use, and your thesis statement is social media use is associated with worsening depression and poor self-image. Okay? And let's suppose you come across an article that has multiple studies in it. So the first study investigates social media use and depression, and the second study investigates video game use and depression, right? Well, only the first study is going to be relevant to your thesis, so only discuss study 1 in your annotation or your summary, right? Because the other one isn't relevant. So just because there are other studies in your article doesn't mean you have to discuss them. Okay. So let's suppose you come across a meta-analysis. So a meta-analysis is just an article that summarizes statistically a bunch of other studies to look at the size of their effects. Okay, so let's suppose you come across a meta-analysis that examines 2,500 articles looking at depression and its relationship with social media, age, prior trauma, early life stress, and a number of other variables, right? So here again, the only variables that matter to you are going to be the relationship between depression and social media. Okay, so when you talk about this article, you don't need to include any information on age, prior trauma, early life stress, or anything like that. Okay, you need to only focus your annotation on those two variables, depression and social media. Okay. Okay. Again, if you come across a literature review and it summarizes research on social media and its negative consequences, and those negative consequences are depression, anxiety, cyberbullying, checking behavior, looking for notifications, headaches, eye strain, misinformation, etc. Okay, those are a lot of different consequences. You're only interested in how social media might increase depression. Okay, anxiety might also be relevant if you're looking into social media's consequences on mental health more broadly. Okay, but you can ignore things like checking behavior, headaches, eye strain, and misinformation, right? Because those variables are not relevant to your thesis. Okay, all right, so now that we have covered how to write an annotated bibliography, I wanted to remind you of the requirements, right? So you're going to include 7 to 10 sources, and they must all be journal articles, so nothing like books, dissertations, blogs, or web pages. Okay, they can be completed in your lab groups or individually, whichever you prefer. And your annotated bibliography is going to be due Friday, March 19th by 11:59 p.m. Okay, so I hope that was informative for you. Certainly feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.